Mark Reynolds was a man who lived for his family. At 38, he wasn't rich, but he carried the kind of pride only a working man could. He ran deliveries for a shipping company, sometimes gone 10 or 12 hours a day, but he always came back with a smile, especially when his little girl, Sophie, would leap into his arms. At only 8 years old, Sophie had already wrapped herself around his heart in a way nothing else could. She was curious, tender, and filled with an innocence Mark cherished above all else. To everyone in town, Mark looked blessed. He had a steady job, a nice modest house at the end of a quiet street, and a wife, Laura, who people thought was the perfect mother. She was graceful, calm in public, always putting on the air of being devoted. Mark believed it, too, at least, he wanted to. That afternoon, his delivery route finished early, and for once he wasn't bone-tired. On the way home, he picked up Sophie's favorite strawberry cupcakes from a bakery she loved. He couldn't wait to see her face when he surprised her. But when he pulled into the driveway, something strange tugged at him. The shades in the front windows were drawn tight, unusual for Laura, who loved natural light. The house looked still, too still. He shrugged off the unease at first, thinking maybe Sophie was napping, but the second he stepped through the front door, his gut told him something wasn't right. There was no TV playing, no humming from the kitchen, no laughter or footsteps. Just silence. Then, faintly, he heard it. A muffled cry. Small, shaky. His chest tightened. He set the cupcakes on the counter and moved quickly down the hall toward Sophie's room. The closer he got, the clearer the sound became. His daughter's voice, broken and trembling. And then, another voice, Laura's. But it wasn't calm or motherly. It was sharp. Cold. Filled with venom. You're such a burden. Why do you always mess things up? Stop crying or I'll give you something to cry about. Mark's hand froze on the doorknob. The words sliced through him. He pushed the door open, and the sight inside knocked the air from his lungs. Sophie sat crumpled on the floor, her small arms shielding her face. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and across her arm was the red sting of a belt strap. Hovering above her was Laura, clutching the leather belt in her hand, her face twisted with fury that made her look like a stranger. Mark's whole body shook. He couldn't process what he was seeing, his wife, the woman he trusted, standing over their daughter with cruelty in her eyes. Laura. His voice thundered, filled with disbelief and rage. Laura spun around, startled, her hand loosening around the belt. It clattered to the floor. Mark, this isn't what it looks like. But Sophie's sobs told every truth Mark needed to know. The little girl scrambled toward him, throwing herself into his arms, her tiny body trembling. Mark dropped to his knees, cradling her against his chest, his heart breaking at the welt across her arm. Daddy, Sophie whispered through her sobs. Please don't leave me. He kissed the top of her head, his throat burning. I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here. Nobody's going to hurt you again. Laura stepped forward, her face pale now, her voice desperate. Mark, you have to listen to me. She's been out of control lately, I didn't mean to go that far. I just wanted to discipline her. I love her, you know I do. Mark's eyes blazed as he stood, still holding Sophie tightly. Love? This is love to you? Leaving marks on an 8-year-old? Making her afraid of her own mother? Laura's lips trembled. You don't understand, you're never home. You don't see what it's like day after day. She doesn't listen, she pushes me, she... Enough. Mark's roar cut her off. You think being tired or frustrated gives you the right to break a child? To break our child? Sophie pressed her face into his chest, shaking her head as if she didn't want to hear her mother's voice anymore. That image seared itself into Mark's mind. It told him all he needed, this wasn't the first time. With trembling hands, he pulled Sophie back just enough to look into her tearful eyes. Baby, Has mommy done this before? When I wasn't here? Sophie hesitated, her little chin quivering. Then, almost inaudible, she whispered, yes, sometimes. Mark felt the air leave his lungs. He wanted to collapse, to scream, to destroy every memory of Laura ever touching their daughter. But he forced himself to stay strong, to be the anchor Sophie needed. Behind him, Laura began crying, her words tumbling out in panic. I didn't want to, Mark, I swear, I've just been under so much stress. It's not who I am. I need help, I need. Mark turned, his jaw tight, his voice filled with a pain that could crush stone. If you needed help, you should have asked. But what you did. What you've been doing. That's not stress, Laura. That's cruelty. And I will never let it happen again. The silence afterward was heavy, broken only by Sophie's soft sobs against his chest. Mark knew he stood at a crossroads. He could turn a blind eye, convince himself this was a mistake, or he could make the choice that would tear his marriage apart but protect his daughter. And deep down, his decision was already made. Mark didn't sleep that night. After holding Sophie until she finally drifted off in her room, he sat at the edge of his bed with his face in his hands. The house was quiet, but his mind raged. Every image of Laura with that belt, every tear Sophie had shed, every whispered admission of, sometimes, tore him apart. Laura sat across the room, her face streaked with tears. She had tried to explain, to beg, to apologize, but Mark's silence was heavier than any words she could muster. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and tired. You need to leave tomorrow. I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. Not with her. Laura's eyes widened. Mark, please, don't do this. She needs both of us. We can get counseling, I can change. No, Mark cut her off sharply. What Sophie needs is safety. What she needs is a mother who protects her, not one she hides from. I can't gamble her future on promises. For once, Laura didn't argue. She only lowered her head, silent tears dripping onto the floor. The next morning, Mark dropped Sophie off at school. He kissed her forehead, forcing a smile. Have a good day, sweetheart. Daddy's picking you up later, okay? She nodded, clutching his hand tightly before letting go. Mark's chest ached at the thought of her sitting in class with that red mark hidden beneath her sleeve. No child deserved that. When he got back home, Laura was packing a bag. The house was quiet except for the sound of zippers. Mark leaned against the wall, watching. I don't know what I became, Laura whispered without looking at him. I used to love her laugh. But somewhere along the way, her voice started to feel like noise. I don't even recognize myself anymore. Mark shook his head, anger and sorrow tangled in his chest. Then you should have recognized it before it went this far. Because now it's too late. Laura left that afternoon. There was no dramatic fight, no slammed doors. Just silence as she walked out carrying the life they'd built together. For the next few weeks, Mark poured himself into Sophie. He rearranged his shifts, spent evenings helping her with homework, tucked her in with stories until she fell asleep. Slowly, he saw her shoulders loosen, her giggles return, her trust begin to rebuild. But the scars, emotional and physical, lingered. One night, Sophie asked him in a small voice, Daddy, why didn't you know? Why didn't you see it before? The question shattered him. Tears filled his eyes as he knelt beside her bed. Because I wanted to believe everything was okay. I thought working hard and keeping the lights on was enough. But I should have been here. I should have protected you sooner. Sophie reached out, touching his cheek. But you came home. You found me. You saved me. Those words would stay with him forever. Months passed. Mark filed for divorce, determined never to let Laura back into Sophie's life unsupervised. Laura tried to fight, pleading through lawyers and letters, but the evidence of Sophie's injuries and the testimony from Mark were undeniable. Custody was granted solely to him. Still, something inside Mark wrestled. He wasn't a man who believed people were born evil. He knew Laura must have been battling demons she never confessed. But he also knew it didn't excuse her cruelty. Sophie deserved a fresh start, free of fear. The turning point came one rainy afternoon when Sophie brought home a school project. It was a drawing of her family, just her and Mark holding hands beneath a big, bright sun. Laura wasn't there. Mark asked gently, "Sweetheart, why didn't you draw Mommy?" Sophie looked at him, her eyes calm but older than they should have been. "Because she's not in my safe place. Only you are." Mark hugged her tight, tears falling freely. In that moment, he realized the truth. He hadn't just caught his wife hurting their daughter, he'd been given a second chance to build Sophie a new world, one where she'd never have to doubt her worth again. Years later, people would tell Mark how strong Sophie had become. She grew into a confident young woman, resilient, kind, and full of hope. And whenever someone asked her where she found her strength, she'd smile softly and say, "The day my dad came home early. Because he didn't just walk in the door, he walked into my pain and never let go." And Mark, every time he looked at her, would remember the moment his heart broke, and the way love stitched it back together. The ending wasn't about what he lost. It was about what he saved.